Hello there and welcome back to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
I'm Chaz the Chidallo.
This week, as America marks 22 years since the 9/11 attacks, Chile marks 50 years since a US-backed coup overthrew a democratically elected government.
And we're going to be taking a look at the immigration crisis that's spread all the way from the southern border to New York City and beyond. And we'll be busting some malarkey. But first...
Well, it wasn't exactly a surprise after months of pressure from Trump-backed Republican House members. This week, Speaker Kevin McCarthy announced,
I am directing our House committee to open a formal impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden.
Speaker McCarthy says the inquiry will be headed by the House Oversight Committee in coordination with the Judiciary and Ways and Means Committees.
The American people deserve to know that the public offices are not for sale, and that the federal government is not being used to cover up the actions of a politically associated family.
The White House has so far given a pretty muted response, nothing from the president himself, while spokesman Ian Sams issued a statement saying House Republicans have been investigating the president for 9 months and they have turned up no evidence of wrongdoing. Meanwhile, Democratic House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries made clear his view that this is all being done at the behest of former President Trump.
Extreme MAGA Republicans have launched an illegitimate impeachment inquiry that is a kangaroo court, fishing expedition, and conspiracy theater rolled into one.
But without doubt, the best response came from John Fetterman, Democratic Senator from Pennsylvania.
About this news that Speaker McCarthy has formally launched an impeachment or has said he's going to.
Oh my God, really? Oh my gosh, it's devastating. Ooh, don't do it. Please don't do it. Oh no.
The problem for Speaker McCarthy is that while the Trump base has been demanding this inquiry, not all Republicans are on board.
I have not seen any evidence that links President Biden to Hunter Biden's activities at this point. I will be getting a briefing later in the week. I'm looking forward to understanding more of what the Oversight Committee has uncovered, but at this point I have not seen that evidence.
Which is why Kevin McCarthy did not hold a vote authorising the impeachment inquiry, because he wasn't confident it would pass, and that could be a problem, as Politico reported this week. In January 2020, the Donald Trump-led Justice Department formally declared that impeachment inquiries by the House are invalid unless the chamber takes a formal vote to authorise them. So, according to the Office of the Legal Counsel, any subpoenas issued to the DOJ, the FBI or the IRS looking at their previous or ongoing investigations into Hunter Biden's finances will not be enforceable. The plan now seems to be start the impeachment inquiry and hope something significant comes up, then hold a formal vote. But if Kevin McCarthy thought the inquiry alone might give him some political cover to pass a budget deal that'll keep the government from shutting down later this month, well, Republican Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, a close confidant of Donald Trump, had some more bad news for him. Gaetz is basically threatening to try and remove McCarthy from the Speaker's chair if he does any deal for funding.
Then I will lead the resistance to this uniparty and the Biden, McCarthy, Jeffries government that they are attempting to build.
The selfsame Republican committees now involved with the impeachment inquiry have already subpoenaed over 12,000 bank records and 2,000 suspicious activity reports without uncovering evidence that President Biden profited from his son Hunter's business dealings, or indeed that he interfered with Ukraine policy as vice president to protect his son's business interests. So the fishing expedition continues. It remains very much to be seen whether articles of impeachment or a formal impeachment vote is ever conducted in the House. If that were to pass and Biden were to be impeached, he is then almost certain to be acquitted by the Democrat majority Senate, unless, of course, there is something that truly amounts to proof of high crimes and misdemeanours, but maybe not even then, Chaz, such is the nature of politics. Either way, this story is going to be with us for a long time.
It certainly is, which is more than I can say for Ken Buck, I fear. The Republicans definitely have him in the gun. For example, one Republican had told CNN that everyone on Capitol Hill knows that Ken Buck has given up on his work with the Freedom Caucus so he can try out for jobs with TV networks or the Biden administration. Another Republican said, we call him Buck Cool. It's always a nickname.
So clever, so very, very clever.
But honestly, there are heaps of Republican senators expressing doubts about this move, including 3 of the 4 Republican Senate leaders. I just don't think this is the ideal time for Republicans to be hitting the red button. Firstly, the committee process that's been working so far has been making an impact. In a CNN poll last week, 64% of independents said that they believe Joe Biden was at least somewhat involved in Hunter's business dealings. Even 28% of Democrats agreed. 39% of independents thought Joe Biden had done something illegal. 23% of Democrats agreed. 52% of independents thought Joe Biden had inappropriately influenced the Hunter investigation. 31% of Democrats agreed. The current process is actually working. It's making an impact for Republicans, so why would they mess with it? Usually you'd initiate an impeachment inquiry to compel more information from the administration, but that hasn't been a problem so far either.
Every subpoena that I've signed as chairman of the House Oversight Committee over the last 5 months, we've gotten 100% of what we've requested, whether it's with the FBI or with banks or with Treasury.
In fact, Matt Gaetz made an excellent point in that speech that John quoted from before.
Mr. Speaker, you boasted in January that we would use the power of the subpoena and the power of the purse. But here we are, 8 months later, and we haven't even sent the first subpoena to Hunter Biden.
So they haven't even tried to subpoena Hunter Biden yet. Why would they escalate matters now? Then there's Kevin McCarthy's embarrassing hypocrisy about not holding a vote to start the impeachment inquiry. I mean, look, there's nothing stopping him from skipping the vote. Nancy Pelosi did exactly the same thing during the first Trump impeachment. But at the time, Kevin McCarthy did have a right old whinge about it. He said that Pelosi couldn't decide on impeachment unilaterally and that it requires a full vote of the House of Representatives. Fine. You might say that Pelosi set a new precedent and McCarthy's just following that precedent. But only 11 days before this decision now, McCarthy told Breitbart that opening an impeachment is a serious matter. That's why if we move forward with an impeachment inquiry, it would occur through a vote on the floor of the People's House and not through a declaration by one person. That was on the 1st of September, like 2 weeks ago. What has changed? Finally, as John pointed out, McCarthy clearly doesn't have the numbers right now for even an impeachment inquiry, so he definitely wouldn't have the numbers for an actual impeachment. So what's the point of accelerating now? And by the way, that problem about the votes is about to become worse because Steve Scalise is being treated for multiple myeloma and Chris Stewart is retiring this week. So that's 2 fewer votes that McCarthy can count on. So now he's got a margin of 2. So given all that, why would McCarthy head down this road right now? I think it's just self-preservation, to be honest. Like Matt Gaetz made very clear last week that when the House returned, he expected Republicans to seize the initiative and force a vote on impeachment or McCarthy wouldn't be in his job for long. Matt Gaetz said that he'd hold a press conference on midday. At 11 a.m, Kevin McCarthy made his speech. That, to me, does not sound like a recipe for sound strategizing, John.
No, indeed. And apparently, the reports are Kevin McCarthy's own staff didn't know that he was going to pull the trigger on the impeachment inquiry at that moment. And it immediately looked like a miscalculation because he thought it was going to buy him that cover to get a budget deal passed. Now, instead, he's got a government shutdown and a impeachment inquiry, both taking place, and a lot of people are going to say both are going to be pretty unpopular for Republicans, but we'll see. You know, of course, Chaz, speaking of strategy, sometimes honesty is the best strategy. You might be thinking that all of this is just Republican payback for the Democrats impeaching Donald Trump not once but twice. Well, here's somebody who clearly thinks that is the case.
And they did it to me, and had they not done it to me, I think, and nobody officially said this, but I think had they not done it to me, and I'm very popular in the region. They like me and I like them, the Republican Party. Perhaps you wouldn't have it being done to them.
Oh, and by the way, Chaz, Trump also suggested in that interview that the payback will continue with criminal indictments of his enemies if he's re-elected next year. So again, saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, he also, he truthed out that it was payback in all caps as well. I'm not sure that's really going to convince Republican moderates to vote for an impeachment. So maybe honesty isn't the best policy in this case, but anyway.
Yeah, we'll see. Earlier today, the president's son was indicted on federal firearms charges following the collapse of a plea deal last month. This is a 3-count indictment. Hunter Biden is accused of lying on a form that he had to fill out before being allowed to buy a .38 Colt Cobra special pistol in October 2018. It is against the law to buy a gun when you are taking illegal drugs and to lie about not taking drugs on those forms. He did possess this gun for 11 days at a time that he admitted being addicted to crack cocaine. These charges are pretty serious though, Chaz. They do carry a maximum sentence of 25 years behind bars potentially.
Yeah, and at a time when Hunter has been accused of getting special treatment because he's the president's son, I should point out that in 2017, according to the stats, 112,000 transactions trying to buy guns were denied in that year because of form issues.
Yes.
People either being mistaken or lying on their forms
Oh,
for
I forgot
whatever
about
reason.
the drugs. Can I still have the gun though?
112,000 times. How many times do you think people were prosecuted for that? For any offence, not just for this one, for any offence whatsoever?
I'm going to say 112,000 times.
No, 12 times.
12 times?
Yes, so it's fair to say that if Hunter Biden was getting special treatment towards him before, he's now getting special treatment against him now.
Kind of cuts both ways when you're the son of an American politician.
It does, but just before we go, I just want to say just one quick thing about the whole Hunter thing.
Yes.
We're going to go into the facts of the impeachment in future episodes, without doubt. But I just want to say one thing overall, and that is before you were very precise with your wording, which I very much appreciated, when you were talking about the things that there is no evidence for at this point in time, like that Joe Biden has been paid or something, things like that. Everything you said was correct. But the other media haven't been necessarily quite as careful as you with their wording. And there's been a lot of, there's no evidence of any wrongdoing. Without evidence of any wrongdoing. That's the catchphrase I've seen a lot. Without evidence of any wrongdoing. Now, that is just flat out not true. There is plenty of evidence of wrongdoing from Hunter, and there is definitely evidence of wrongdoing from Joe Biden. I would say there's insufficient evidence of wrongdoing, or it's certainly not proof of wrongdoing, but that doesn't mean there's zero evidence.
Yeah.
I just want to put that out there because those kinds of subtle wording differences, they make it.
There's more than a whiff of smoke, but wrongdoing, of course, is also not a high crime or misdemeanour and an impeachable offence. So we're a long way from all of that. But look, of much greater immediate concern for the Biden White House, some unexpectedly bad economic news.
New report shows U.S. inflation picked up in August. The Consumer Price Index shows prices climbed 3.7% compared to a year ago, more than expected.
Yeah, that's for sure. And why is inflation suddenly back up?
Gas prices are on the rise. Energy overall up 5.6% month over month. Also, food prices were up just slightly, and rent continues to be a thorn in everybody's side, up for the 40th consecutive month.
So now Biden's economic team and the Federal Reserve are going to be hoping that now that the summer driving season is over, those petrol prices will start to ease, and Americans who've been suffering through heat wave after heat wave in recent months will be able to turn down or off their air conditioners. But of course, with that cooler weather comes demand for heating. So energy demand is going to continue. A few headaches right now for Joe Biden, and this is really kind of a gift to Republicans as well, Chaz. The former president sounding pretty gleeful, seizing on the bad news.
Just out, inflation up, income down.
And of course,
Big inflation increased, millions more people pouring into our country than anticipated by Crooked Joe. What a mess.
I think the shift key is stuck.
yeah, that's right. Case sensitive, Mr. President. We'll be looking at the immigration crisis in just a moment, but the economy is definitely looming as a crucial battleground for both Joe Biden and Donald Trump heading into 2024.
Absolutely, and it'll certainly be important if America doesn't sort out inflation right now, because for the last few months, inflation has definitely been settling down, and we were wondering on the show when people would notice.
Yep.
Well, it takes a while, and it takes 6 months at the best of times. Now, this week, bang, that's just ruined the last 3-4 months. I know at one point last year, the monthly inflation rate projected for an entire year reached 15%, and this is nothing on that. But still, an annualised rate of 7.8% inflation, even for 1 month, is not good. That's going to stop Biden getting any credit for the economy. It's going to encourage the Reserve Bank to keep hiking interest rates, not to mention it'll be really bad for people just living their lives. Let's not forget them. It's not all politics. You mentioned that gas prices were rising. Are they ever? Petrol prices raised 10.6% just last month, accounting for over half of the inflation surge. And of course, that flows through to all transport costs and to prices generally.
Yeah, and look, it definitely has a real world effect. But the other effect, and this is something that operates more on that sort of on that psychological level, if a gallon of milk costs an extra 10 cents, you maybe notice that when you go to the supermarket, or maybe you don't notice it. But every driver, every person down a main road where you've got the price of a gallon of gas up in lights, they see that and they know that it should have a 2 in front of it. If it's got a 3 in front of it or a 4 in front of it, then they go, well, prices are out of control. It's a constant reminder.
Yeah, absolutely right. But I'll tell you that the main thing of all is that this kind of inflation erodes all the wage gains that people have been enjoying for the last few years as well. Median household income fell 2.3% last year, accounting for inflation. In fact, real median household incomes peaked at 78 grand in 2019 under guess who? And since then, they've declined 4 grand. And that is entirely because of inflation. Even worse, a number of pandemic-era welfare payments and tax cuts expired while all that was happening. So add all that up, and it means that real median household incomes after taxes actually fell 8.8% just last year. And poverty rates grew 5 points to 12.4% just last year.
Yes, and that is off the back of a major increase in childhood poverty, which is almost as a direct result of the expiration of the child tax credits, which were introduced in the first year of the Biden administration but expired last year because Joe couldn't get Manchin on board to keep the thing going. And as a result, childhood poverty straight up again.
Exactly, and people do notice that kind of thing for sure. So Biden needs to get inflation under control now. The year was 1986. Howard the Duck was a cultural icon. John Barron was still listening to new music. And America last passed an immigration bill of any consequence. Since then, immigration law in America has drifted aimlessly, especially since 2013 when Congress last even tried to pass comprehensive immigration reform. Essentially, Republicans won't support any reform that provides an amnesty to large numbers of illegal immigrants, and Democrats won't support any reform that doesn't provide that same amnesty. So we've gotten to the point where even the immigration secretary says,
first and foremost, we're dealing with a broken immigration system, a fact about which everyone agrees.
He's got that right. But then last year, Texas Governor Greg Abbott debuted a new strategy. He said he'd start busing migrants from Texas straight to Washington, where the administration could more immediately address the needs of the people that they are allowing to come across the border. Now, that was obviously a troll and a protest, but Abbott emphasised that busing migrants would be completely voluntary. The migrants would only be going to places they wanted to go to anyway. So theoretically, it was a win-win for Texas and the migrants. Soon, Abbott was expanding the program and sending migrants to New York as well. 12 months and over 500 buses later, Abbott has bused over 35,000 migrants to sanctuary cities. Those are cities that limit their cooperation with the federal government when that government's trying to deport illegal immigrants. In particular, Abbott sent 11,000 migrants to Washington, D.C., 13,000 migrants to New York, and 6,000 migrants to Chicago. And while those numbers are not small, that was during a period where over 3.5 million interceptions happened on the southern border. So the buses are really a drop in the bucket. Take New York. Abbott sent 13,000 migrants to New York at the same time as New York was receiving 100,000 migrants in total. And it's not just New York that's struggling. In Chicago, they're putting hundreds of migrants up in police stations at the moment. In Massachusetts, they're literally asking residents to provide room and board for migrants.
If you have an extra room or suite in your home, please consider hosting a family.
But New York seems to be the place experiencing the worst problems, where, combined with their many homeless people, they're now providing shelter for more than 105,000 people, which Mayor Eric Adams says will cost about $5 billion this year and potentially $12 billion by July 2025. Now, the federal government has offered access to an air hangar and 11 federal sites to potentially house those migrants, but New York Mayor Eric Adams is not impressed, and he's gone into full Hulk smash mode.
Never in my life have I had a problem that I did not see an ending to. I don't see an ending to this. I don't see an ending to this. This issue will destroy New York City. destroy New York City. We're getting 10,000 migrants a month. Every community in this city is going to be impacted. We got a $12 billion deficit that we're going to have to cut. Every service in this city is going to be impacted.
The day after that speech, he ordered New York's agency heads to slash every city budget 15% by early next year to pay for the migrant care. He's even had these flyers handed out on the southern border declaring there is no guarantee you'll get a place in New York City and beseeching migrants to consider going to another city. Now, that's a far cry from the usual migrant-friendly language that New York is famous for. But why has this become such a problem? Well, firstly, New York has a right to shelter law, so they're legally obligated to find shelter for all of these migrants that you see right now, no matter how many of them there are. Secondly, where the migrants are coming from is also a problem. Most of the recent migrants to New York are Venezuelan, and since their migration wave only began recently, they're very unlikely to have friends or family in New York who can support them, so it's all on the city. Finally, it's a problem that they're generally seeking asylum. You see, thanks to Bill Clinton, all asylum seekers legally have to wait for at least 6 months before they can apply for work authorization. And even after 6 months, there are all kinds of bureaucratic snafus. So in reality, asylum seekers often have to wait more than 20 months before they actually get that work permit card in their hand. That whole time, the city has to support the migrants. And while that's happening, while more and more migrants are coming every day, some of them on their own, some of them on a Greg Abbott bus. And of course, the government can't change the work authorization law because Congress won't pass immigration reform, and that's an act of Congress. So that's the problem, John.
Yes, and in the interest of full disclosure, that New Music in 1986 was a Mel Torme CD. Not exactly new. But look, for more, we are joined by Miriam Jordan, immigration correspondent for the New York Times. Miriam, welcome to Planet America.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So when Mayor Adams says that this issue will destroy New York City, what is he saying really? I mean, this is 100,000 people in a city of 8.5 million. How can they destroy things?
Well, I think there's some slight exaggeration going on there. What Mayor Adams is really referring to is the cost that the city has to shoulder to offer housing in shelters to upwards of 55,000 migrants who are in the city in need of a roof over their heads.
So would it be true to say then that if migrants are allowed to work immediately, then most of these problems would just go away?
There has been a push by, both the mayor and the governor of New York to allow migrants to work immediately. That would require a change in the law, which only Congress could achieve. But in the meanwhile, yes, it's correct that if they were able to work immediately, logic dictates that they would be able to start amassing the money that they needed to be able to move out of the shelters more quickly and settle down and establish themselves in New York City.
Miriam, it's not just Secretary Mayorkas that is saying that America's immigration system is broken. They've been saying that on both sides of politics for decades now. What needs to be done to fix it?
First and foremost, the Democrats and the Republicans need to come to a consensus in order to update the immigration system in the United States, right? It requires changes in laws. As long as that doesn't happen, we're in a stalemate. I think that the biggest priority, and actually feel that Democrats and Republicans would agree on, is guest worker programs. The United States needs this labor force. The only reason people are coming to this country in such large numbers is that they know that they can make a living here and that they'll be better off here than in their home countries. When they come here, even if it's difficult in the beginning, as we're seeing in New York, ultimately they find work and they can start lives anew. So it would be wise to give them the opportunity to come here legally and in an orderly fashion. And that's not happening currently.
How would you respond to places like Texas or Arizona saying, why does the media focus so much on New York City? We get 100,000 migrants per month, not per year. What about us?
The truth is that migrants have been crossing the border forever. And even when there are 2 million encounters last year, and we're on track for as many this year, the vast majority of the migrants pass through those cities along the border in Arizona, Texas, California, and they quickly board buses or even airplanes to reach their destinations of choice. There's not much economic activity or much dynamism along border towns, I must say. Most migrants who I meet on the border want to go to New York or Chicago or Houston. They want to go to cities that are economic engines, where there's construction to be done, where there are service sector jobs, where there's a vibrant economy to absorb them. They are not thinking of staying along the border between the US and Mexico in a small town. That's just a place through which they pass.
Miriam, there have been more migrants intercepted on the northern border so far this year than there were in the 10 previous years combined. Now, that's still a very small total number, only about 6,000 migrants so far this year, but could that potentially become a concern down the track?
I spent some time last year along the border with Canada. For much of the year, it's a really inhospitable environment there. And in fact, I was reporting on the disappearance and death by freezing of an Indian family that had crossed. They were so close to the US, but the snowstorm blinded them and they, couldn't make it. They lost their way. So it's really perilous to try to cross there. I don't think that we're going to see numbers soaring during the warmer months. Yes, we will see more people coming, but it's not as porous, it's not as easy.
Finally, Miriam, you've been covering this beat for a number of years. How is it that America has gone from send us your huddled masses to build that wall in what seems like a few short years?
That's what it looks like. But actually, throughout American history, there have been periods when immigrants have sort of fallen out of favor in the public imagination. And usually those are times of economic distress or other kind of issues. I mean, right now, the US economy is very healthy, but the country was battered by COVID and lockdowns, and, folks didn't have steady work. They felt somehow, I think, adrift. And then we've got these new political actors like Donald Trump, who have really made this issue, contentious, more contentious than maybe, it's ever been. So this is going to last a while, unfortunately, but I think that we will see change in the future toward more favorable posture vis-a-vis immigrants.
Miriam, thanks for having a fireside chat.
Okay, all the best. Bye-bye.
And next week, we're going to be looking at the southern border for a broader explanation of why America's migration system is so messed up.
It may not be exactly likely, but it is possible that Donald Trump could be sent to jail and yet still campaign for president from behind bars. It turns out it's happened before.
It's probably the most unusual campaign button ever. For president, convict number 9653. The convict and candidate was Eugene Debs, and in 1920, he was one of the most famous and controversial men in America. A former railway worker and union leader from Terre Haute, Indiana, Debs was a co-founder of the Industrial Workers of the World, a Marxist labour organisation known as the Wobblies. He ran as a socialist in the presidential elections of 1900, 04, 08 and 1912, when he campaigned against President William Howard Taft, former President Teddy Roosevelt and future President Woodrow Wilson. Debs wanted to throw out the capitalist system entirely, telling supporters gathered at Madison Square Gardens, "The Republican, Democratic and Progressive parties are but branches of the same capitalistic tree. They all stand for wage slavery." Debs came a distant fourth, but still won 6% of the vote nationally and over 15% in several states. It was President Woodrow Wilson who would later declare war on Germany in 1917. Debs remained firmly against any American involvement in a war he saw as being run for profit by capitalist munitions makers. Wilson then signed into law the Sedition Act of 1918, which made it a crime to willfully utter, print, write or publish any disloyal, profane, scurrilous or abusive language about the United States government. Less than 1 month later, Debs set about doing exactly that, with a speech delivered in Canton, Ohio on June 16, 1918, 5 months before Germany's defeat. There is no audio of it surviving. This recording, though, was made in 1979 by a then 38-year-old socialist named Bernie Sanders.
And here let me emphasize the fact, and it cannot be repeated too often, that the working class who fight all the battles, the working class who make the supreme sacrifices, the working class who freely shed their blood and furnish the corpses, have never yet had a voice in either declaring war or making peace. It is the ruling class that invariably does both. They alone declare war, and they alone make peace. Yours not to reason why, yours but to do or die.
Debs was quickly arrested, put on trial, found guilty under the Sedition Act, telling the judge he would ask for no mercy and plead for no immunity. He got neither and was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. The Washington Post reported his conviction serves notice to all that disloyalty and sedition, even though masquerading under the guise of free speech, will not be tolerated. After 2 years in jail in Atlanta, Georgia, and with another presidential election looming, the Socialist Party again nominated Debs as their candidate. Delegates at the convention cheered for half an hour before singing a rousing chorus of the communist anthem. In the election of 1920, radio was not yet a factor, nor was television. Silent newsreels of candidates helped get their message out. Eugene Debs, of course, couldn't travel the country, but voters all knew why. Republican Warren Harding ran what he called a front porch campaign from his home in Ohio. Debs announced his campaign would be from the front cell. With the unpopular and ailing Woodrow Wilson off the ballot on Election Day, Harding won in a landslide over Democrat James Cox. But despite remaining in prison, convict number 9653 Eugene Debs won over 900,000 votes. A month after the election of 1920, with the war now over, Congress repealed the Sedition Act. But Wilson refused to set Debs free. It wasn't until 8 months after President Harding took the oath of office that Eugene Debs was finally released. His health in tatters, Debs died less than 5 years after leaving jail. He didn't live to see the end of the Roaring Twenties, the stock market bust, the Great Depression, the rise of fascism, and America's brief alliance with the Soviet Union against the Nazis, or indeed the long Cold War that followed. But in another presidential election a century after Eugene Debs and his front cell campaign, his influence, on some at least, is very clear.
Many of the issues that Debs struggled with, they exist today. What Debs was about was changing public consciousness and saying, you know what, that's wrong. And that's what we have got to do as well. I don't want 100 years from now people to be looking back and say, why did you let the fossil fuel industry destroy the planet. Were you crazy?
On Monday this week, the United States commemorated 22 years since the 9/11 terrorist attacks on Washington, D.C. and New York. Almost 3,000 people lost their lives on that day, and the death toll continues to rise.
341 members of New York's fire department have now succumbed to ground zero-related illnesses.
Unfortunately, the exposure of that day and the days that followed during the rescue and recovery efforts have really started to take its toll.
September 11th also marked 50 years since the US-backed military coup that ousted the democratically elected government of Chile. The world's first elected Marxist leader, President Salvador Allende, made this broadcast as tanks blocked the streets of Santiago and Chilean Air Force jets bombed the presidential palace.
Solo me cabe decirle a los trabajadores, yo no voy a renunciar. Colocado en un tránsito histórico, pagaré con mi vida la lealtad del pueblo.
Within hours, as military units closed in on the palace, Allende ended his own life with an AK-47 rifle given to him by Cuban President Fidel Castro. Thousands more deaths followed as left-wing supporters of the ousted government were rounded up, tortured and shot. Thousands more disappeared. 200,000 others fled Chile altogether. The military junta led by General Augusto Pinochet ruled Chile for 17 years before democracy was restored. The role the United States played in the overthrow of the Allende government remained shrouded in secrecy. The CIA is known to have interfered in elections and destabilised the country while supporting right-wing politicians and publications. The Nixon administration's Secretary of State Henry Kissinger was deeply concerned about the election of a Marxist government in Chile and how it might spread Soviet influence in South America. At the time, he denied direct involvement, but he defended the role played by the CIA in undermining Allende.
All of the matters to which you refer have been developed by well-established procedures in the government that have been consistently tightened, approved by the President and briefed to the appropriate committees.
Richard Feinberg was living in Chile when Salvador Allende rose to power in 1970. He went on to become one of America's top experts on Chile, serving as an advisor in both the Carter and Clinton administrations. Professor Feinberg, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat.
Thank you, my pleasure.
So, for those of us who are perhaps not quite old enough to remember, can you sum up for us why was it that the United States opposed Salvador Allende in Chile?
Allende was seen as both a geopolitical and ideological threat to U.S. interests as they were conceived of way back then, 50 years ago. His alliance included socialists and communists, some of whom were, in fact, aligned with the Soviet Union in those days. So that was a concern in the Cold War, of course. And then also, he was a leftist, a Marxist of sort, and Nixon and Kissinger did not want to see such a regime either come to power and certainly not succeed, fearing that there would be a contagion effect in Latin America and perhaps throughout the developing world.
And just how far did the United States go with either overt or covert actions to try and stop Allende's election?
Well, the U.S. both tried to prevent him from coming to power, but also, once he came to power, doing what the United States could do to see him fail and to increase the opposition. And there's been a tremendous amount of research and document release, including by the U.S. government, on what happened in those years. It included everything from all sorts of CIA activities, working with opposition groups to fortify their opposition to Allende, to discourage them from making any agreements with Allende, funding strikes against Allende, and making it more difficult for his government to access international capital markets, all of which was intended on worsening the economic situation and encouraging opposition to the Allende government.
And in that period after the coup, just how conscious was the American administration of the junta's human rights abuses. Did Kissinger or Nixon or Gerald Ford know what was going on?
Well, there's no question that there was a lot of knowledge that over time that the government, and all you had to do was be in Chile, and people knew that the military were on the streets, that people were being shot, that people were being disappeared. And there was no secret about all of that. So, of course, the international community was aware in general, if not of every detail, at the massive human rights violations that were occurring.
You were, of course, a member of the Carter administration. During that period as well, Democrats in Congress, through Frank Church's Senate committee, Senator Ted Kennedy as well, were trying to highlight the human rights abuses in Chile. How successful were their efforts, do you think?
I think there's no doubt that first the Democrats in Congress during the latter part of the Nixon-Ford years, and then when Carter himself comes to power, that he moves human rights to the center of American foreign policy. And during his campaign of 1976, his criticism of the Kissinger-Nixon realist policies, very cynical policies supporting authoritarian governments despite the human rights violations, that was a very big part of Carter's campaign. So when he comes into office, he's consistent with that, and he pushes human rights to the top of the U.S. foreign policy agenda. And he and his State Department team that I was part of in those years pushed very hard to try to prevent continuation of the human rights violations that were going on in Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and other countries. And I can absolutely confirm that many, many lives were saved as a result of the efforts by the Carter administration to bring to light the human rights violations that were occurring, to locate and, in many instances, free political prisoners before they could be disappeared or assassinated. And I personally met many people from Latin America who thanked the United States government, particularly the Carter administration, for saving their lives or the lives of their parents.
And half a century on, what lessons do you hope the United States takes from the events of 1973?
Of course, the world is so different today. It's very hard for us to imagine, for example, how strong the Marxist left was 50 years ago in Chile and in much of Latin America. And when I say Marxist left, I mean an idea that not just that social justice should be pursued, but that the state should take over the means of production. That was the idea, to reproduce what had happened in the Soviet Union or in Cuba. Those ideas have by and large faded from Latin America. So now the left now is much more we would call social democratic, pursuit of social justice, pursuit of inclusion, sustainability. And the U.S. government is comfortable, by and large, with those ideas. In fact, the Biden administration certainly itself advocates many of those ideas in its own domestic policies. So I think to that extent, there's been a certain convergence in views between progressives in Latin America and in at least the Democratic Party in the United States.
Richard Feinberg, thank you very much indeed for joining Planet America's Fireside Chat.
My pleasure.
Well, Chaz, we are just about out of time for another week, but before we go, time to bust some malarkey.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
Now, Monday, as you said, John, was the 22nd anniversary of 9/11, and Joe Biden commemorated it with this moving speech.
Never forget. We never forget. Each of us, each of those precious lives stolen too soon when evil attacked. Ground Zero in New York. And I remember standing there the next day and looking at the building. I felt like I was looking through the gates of hell.
It's ironic that he would tell us to never forget, John, because it seems Joe Biden has forgotten where he was the day after 9/11. He wasn't looking into the gates of hell unless he really, really doesn't like the Senate.
Some have said yesterday and today that all has changed. All has changed for America. I know what they mean by that, and I respect their view, but I pray that is not true.
While a number of senators did go to New York after the day's proceedings in the Senate there, Biden was not one of them. Instead, he went on Charlie Rose's show.
Senator, thank you for coming.
Happy to be here, Charlie.
It was Biden in the Washington box there, John. Not a huge deal, obviously, but that story was some prime-grade malarkey.
Yes, indeed. It is not great, for sure. In fact, Biden was not at ground zero until 9 days after the attack, not the next day. But can I just remind you that Joe Biden is not the only presidential candidate who has a faulty memory around 9/11?
I watched when the World Trade Center came tumbling down. And I watched in Jersey City, New Jersey, where thousands and thousands of people were cheering as that building was coming down.
He talked about that a lot back in 2015 and 2016. All these Muslims in New Jersey, which has a large Muslim population, celebrating on 9/11. Well, the fact checkers noted that there were press reports of rumours of rooftop celebrations of the attack by Muslims in New York and New Jersey, but concluded they were unfounded rumours. As for Trump's claims that he saw it all on TV, well, no footage has ever been found. This was a big issue back in 2015. Nobody apart from Donald Trump says they remember this. It was a lie that the fact checkers gave their notorious pants on fire rating to. And as well as that, it's a malicious and dangerous lie. President Biden is exaggerating, he is big-noting, maybe it raises more questions about Biden's faulty memory, but former President Trump was inviting hatred of Muslim Americans over 9/11, and that's a whole other category.
That's a fair call. And to be fair to both of them, the faulty 9/11 memories don't end with those two either. There was a study that asked 2,100 Americans about where they were, who they were with, and how they responded on 9/11, and they asked those same Americans a few years later. 40% of those people changed their stories and gave fundamentally different answers when asked again a few years down the track. So plenty of people have dodgy memories about 9/11, but those people aren't running for president, and those people aren't approximately 587 years old, John, so we don't talk about those people.
Yeah, and it makes them vulnerable for criticism for sure. In fact, memory experts will tell you that retrieving memories is not just getting a filing card out of the back of your brain or something. Every time you remember something, you're recreating it and you're rewriting it. You're changing it every single time. So in 22 years, it can change quite dramatically. And it's not just politicians that it happens to all of us. But look, that is it for another trip to Planet America.
We're going to be back at the same time next week or on iView, Facebook and YouTube. And don't forget my podcast Pep, where we're going to be asking what happens when the governor decides to just ignore the law and ban guns anyway.
What does happen?
You'll find out. Listen.
Oh, what a tease. Good night.